I'm Vivian, 35 years old, and until yesterday I was both the wife of Richard Evans and the Chief Financial Officer of Meridian Technologies. Our marriage and business partnership were once my greatest pride. That was before he suspended me in front of our entire staff, claiming financial irregularities. What Richard never realized was that when I invested my inheritance in our company, I added one crucial clause to protect myself. Let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever been underestimated. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. I met Richard during what should have been a routine consultation. I was 30 with a Harvard MBA and a rising star at Lancaster Consulting, known for my ability to transform struggling businesses through financial restructuring. My colleagues jokingly called me the fixer, the person you called when balance sheets needed miraculous resurrection. Richard's startup, Meridian Technologies, was developing innovative security software, but bleeding cash despite promising prototypes. My firm assigned me to evaluate whether it was worth additional investment from our client, a venture capital group that had provided seed funding. From the moment I walked into his cluttered office, Richard captivated me with his vision. Unlike many tech founders I'd met, he could translate complex technical concepts into compelling business opportunities. Tall with sharp features and confident blue eyes, he had a magnetism that extended beyond his business acumen. Most consultants look at our financials and see red flags, he said during our first meeting. But you're seeing possibilities, aren't you? The way he studied my expressions as I reviewed his projections suggested he could read my thoughts. He wasn't wrong. Beneath the cash flow problems, I saw tremendous potential. What began as professional admiration evolved rapidly. After my official consultation ended, Richard asked me to dinner to discuss additional restructuring strategies. That dinner stretched to midnight as we shared our backgrounds and dreams. His parents had lost everything in the 2008 financial crisis, driving his desire to build something substantial. My childhood with a single mother who struggled financially had fueled my determination to achieve financial security and independence. Our courtship was a whirlwind of late-night strategy sessions and weekend escapes. Richard's spontaneity balanced my methodical nature. When he suggested a surprise weekend in Napa Valley, I shocked myself by agreeing despite 3 pending project deadlines. We stayed in a tiny vineyard cottage, making plans for both our relationship and potential business collaborations. 6 months after we met, Richard proposed on the rooftop of my apartment building overlooking the Boston skyline. "You've shown me how to turn dreams into viable plans," he said, holding out a modest but elegant ring. "Marry me, and let's build something extraordinary together." We married at City Hall with only a handful of friends present, both of us too focused on our shared vision to want an elaborate ceremony. The reception was at our favourite restaurant, where we spent half the evening sketching business models on napkins to the amusement of our guests. When Richard's company secured another round of funding, he asked me to join as CFO. It meant leaving my secure position and taking a significant pay cut, but the equity offered long-term potential. More importantly, I believed in Richard's vision and wanted to be part of building something meaningful together. The early days of Meridian Technologies defined our marriage. Exhilarating, exhausting, and completely intertwined, we converted a spare bedroom into our home office, often working until dawn, fueled by takeout and ambition. When additional funding fell through unexpectedly, I didn't hesitate to invest my entire savings and the inheritance from my grandparents, $350,000 that I'd safeguarded for years. The investment came with conditions, however. My financial background had taught me that even the strongest relationships need protective structures. I insisted on a special clause in the shareholder agreement regarding breach of fiduciary duty. Richard laughed it off as typical CFO paranoia, but signed the documents. "You know I'd never do anything to hurt you or the company," he said, kissing my forehead after the papers were signed. "But if it makes you feel better, I understand." I didn't realize then how crucial that clause would become. Our complementary skills drove Meridian's early success. Richard was the visionary who could sell investors and clients on possibilities. I was the pragmatist who ensured those possibilities had solid financial foundations. When he promised clients ambitious deliverables, I found ways to allocate resources to make them happen. When I insisted on financial discipline, he reminded me that strategic risks were necessary for growth. Within 3 years, Meridian grew from our spare bedroom to a downtown office with 40 employees. By year 5, we had over 200 staff and were being courted by major tech companies for potential acquisition. Our security software had become the gold standard for financial institutions, and our data protection systems were expanding into healthcare and government sectors. As the company grew, so did Richard's public profile. He became the face of Meridian, speaking at conferences and appearing in industry publications. My contributions, though central to our success, remained largely behind the scenes. At first, I didn't mind. I'd always preferred spreadsheets to spotlights. But gradually, Richard stopped acknowledging my role, even within the company. In early team meetings, decisions had been collaborative. Richard would say, "Vivian and I think this direction makes the most sense." Over time, this shifted to, "I've decided we should pursue this strategy." In press interviews, the founding story transformed from our shared vision to his breakthrough moment. My investment was recast as a supportive wife believing in her husband's genius. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit, as long as we succeeded together. But as Richard's ego expanded with our company's valuation, the partnership that had characterized both our marriage and our business began to fracture. I just didn't want to admit it yet. The transformation of Meridian's culture happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice until it was complete. In the early days, our small team worked in a collaborative environment where ideas flowed freely, regardless of title. Richard and I would debate strategies openly, sometimes passionately, but always with mutual respect. As we expanded beyond 50 employees, Richard insisted on bringing in executives from larger tech companies to professionalize our operations. These new leaders, predominantly men with traditional corporate backgrounds, subtly shifted our culture. Open debates were replaced with hierarchical decision-making. The creative energy that had fueled our growth gave way to process-driven management. I first noticed the change during budget meetings. Previously, these had been collaborative sessions where department heads justified their needs and collectively determined priorities. Under the new regime, Richard and his inner circle would make preliminary decisions, with the meeting serving merely as an announcement forum. "We need to move faster," Richard explained when I questioned the change. "The consensus approach worked when we were smaller, but scale requires different leadership styles." His new favourite phrase became decisive leadership, which increasingly meant his decisions unchallenged and unquestioned. More concerning was my gradual exclusion from strategic planning. As CFO, my financial oversight remained necessary, but my input on company direction was increasingly unwelcome. I learned about major initiatives only when funding allocations were needed, not during their conception. The most painful shift was in Richard himself. The passionate innovator who had valued my insight, it now seemed irritated by my questions. In meetings, he would cut me off with, "We've already decided on the approach," or "Let's stay on topic," when I raised concerns about financial implications. Several times I received meeting invitations only to have them rescinded hours before, with vague explanations about streamlining attendance. Our home life deteriorated in parallel with these workplace changes. Richard's late nights at the office became routine, with dinner conversations reduced to brief status updates rather than the deep strategic discussions we once enjoyed. When I attempted to discuss company matters at home, he deflected with, "Let's not bring work home," a dramatic shift from our early days when work and life seamlessly integrated. Weekend getaways ceased, entirely replaced by Richard's solo business trips that seemed to multiply each month. When I asked about joining him, there was always a reason why it wasn't a good idea. The schedule was too packed, the client was difficult, the locations weren't interesting. One evening, as I waited up past midnight for Richard to return from a critical client dinner, I received a text from our lead developer, Jamie, who innocently mentioned how productive the team happy hour had been. There was no client dinner that night, just drinks with staff that I hadn't been invited to join. When confronted, Richard dismissed my concern. "You're making something out of nothing. The client cancelled last minute and I ran into the team. It wasn't planned." I might have believed him if it had been an isolated incident, but such misunderstandings had become the norm, not the exception. My first concrete evidence that something was seriously wrong came while reviewing quarterly expense reports. As CFO, I had established clear protocols for documentation, but noticed increasing executive expenses with minimal details. When I drilled down, I found charges for luxury hotels in cities where we had no clients, or operations, expensive restaurant bills for dates, when Richard claimed to be working late at the office, and even jewelry store purchases classified as client gifts. More troubling were wire transfers to a consulting company I'd never heard of, Strategic Vision Partners, receiving monthly payments of $25,000 for unspecified strategic services. No contract existed in our files, and none of our department heads could explain these services. I began a discreet investigation, careful not to alert Richard or his loyal executives. The consulting firm turned out to be registered just 6 months earlier, with an address leading to a virtual office service. The registration name was hidden behind a layer of LLCs, but persistent research led to a disturbing discovery. The beneficial owner appeared to be Richard's college friend, Mark Daniels. Simultaneously, I noticed unusual patterns in our data storage contracts. We were paying for significantly increased capacity with a new vendor at rates well above market standard. The decision had bypassed normal procurement procedures through an executive override, Richard's signature. The most alarming discovery came when reviewing communications with our investors. References appeared to negotiations for additional funding that had never crossed my desk, despite my CFO role requiring involvement in all financing activities. These discussions included potential share restructuring that would significantly dilute my ownership stake. After compiling substantial evidence, I decided to confront Richard at home rather than the office. I chose a Sunday evening when he couldn't deflect with work emergencies or escape to sudden meetings. I presented my findings calmly, focusing on the financial irregularities rather than personal betrayal. These expenses and contracts don't align with our established protocols. As CFO, I need to understand what's happening before our quarterly board review. Richard's reaction shifted from dismissive to hostile as I revealed the depth of my investigation. "You're overstepping," he snapped, pacing our living room. "Some executive decisions don't require CFO micromanagement." When I mentioned Strategic Vision Partners and its connection to Mark Daniels, his face flushed with anger. "You've been spying on me, checking up on my decisions like I'm some junior employee who needs supervision. I'm doing my job," I replied, maintaining my composure. "Financial oversight is literally my responsibility." Richard's laugh was cold and unfamiliar. "Your responsibility is to manage the accounting department and produce reports. Strategic direction is my domain." "That's not how partnerships work, Richard. That's not how our company was structured." His expression hardened as he leaned across the kitchen counter. "You should remember who's in charge here, Vivian. I'm the CEO and majority shareholder. I built this company." "We built it together," I corrected, "with my expertise and my money. Money that's made you wealthy beyond what your little consulting career ever could have," he sneered. "Maybe you should focus on gratitude instead of accusations." I left the room before saying something unforgivable, but his words echoed all night. The man I'd married, who had once valued our partnership above all else, now saw me as merely an employee who should be grateful for the opportunity. The next morning, Richard left early without speaking to me. The tension between us had reached a breaking point, but I never imagined how publicly it would shatter. The quarterly all-hands meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. in our main conference hall. These gatherings had become increasingly theatrical as our company grew, less about transparent communication and more about Richard's performance as the visionary leader. Still, as CFO, my financial presentation was a standard fixture, and I had prepared comprehensive slides on our Q3 results. That morning, Richard and I drove to the office separately. The first time in years we hadn't arrived together for a major company event. The distance between us felt both physical and unbridgeable. The conference room was filled to capacity with over 200 employees, board members seated in the front row, and key investors joining via video conference. I nodded to familiar faces as I took my seat in the front, noticing curious glances at the empty chair beside me, where Richard would normally sit. At precisely 10 a.m., Richard entered through the side door with Jeffrey Barnes, our recently hired Chief Operating Officer, who had quickly become Richard's right-hand man. Instead of taking his seat, Richard went directly to the podium. I noticed he wasn't carrying his usual leather portfolio, but instead held a single folder with the company logo. "Good morning, Meridian," Richard began with his practiced charismatic smile. "Before we dive into department updates, I need to address a serious matter that's come to my attention." My skin prickled with sudden awareness. The folder, his unusual entrance, the way Jeffrey positioned himself near the door. Transparency and integrity have been cornerstone values since I founded this company. Richard continued emphasizing the I in a way that felt deliberate, which makes this situation particularly difficult. He opened the folder and paused for effect, scanning the room. "Our financial team has identified significant irregularities in recent accounting practices. These discrepancies raise serious concerns about oversight within the finance department." The room went completely silent. All eyes shifted to me, the head of the finance department. My heart pounded so loudly, I was certain the microphones would pick it up. "While we conduct a thorough investigation, the board and I have determined that immediate action is necessary to protect the company's interests." Richard's voice had taken on a solemn, regretful tone that I recognized from his negotiations. Completely manufactured. "Effective immediately, Vivian Evans is suspended from her position as Chief Financial Officer." The gasp was audible throughout the room. Board members exchanged glances, some looking as surprised as the employees. Others, those loyal to Richard, nodded with practiced concern. "Jeffrey will temporarily assume CFO responsibilities while an independent audit is conducted," Richard continued, not looking in my direction. "We expect full cooperation from everyone during this process." As if on cue, 2 security personnel appeared at the main entrance. Our head of security, Thomas, looked deeply uncomfortable as he approached the front row. "Vivian, please surrender your company devices to Thomas," Richard instructed, finally meeting my eyes with a cold, triumphant stare. "Your building access has been temporarily restricted. Please clear your personal items from your office under escort." The room of 200 colleagues, many I had hired, mentored, or supported through professional and personal challenges, watched in stunned silence as I rose from my seat. I had a choice in that moment: break down, lash out, or maintain dignity. Years of handling high-pressure financial negotiations had prepared me for maintaining composure under extreme stress. I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, and spoke clearly. "I look forward to the results of any legitimate investigation." My voice carried without the microphone, steady and confident, despite the internal earthquake of emotions. I placed my company phone and laptop on the table rather than handing them directly to Thomas. The walk across the conference room felt endless. Every face was a mixture of shock, pity, or uncomfortable avoidance. A few loyal team members made eye contact, their expressions conveying silent support. Others studied their notepads with sudden intensity, unwilling to witness my humiliation. Thomas apologetically motioned toward the door. "I'm sorry about this, Vivian," he whispered as we exited. "I had no idea until 10 minutes ago when I got the order." The journey to my office took us through the open floor plan, where dozens more employees watched the procession. News had already spread via text messages from those in the meeting. Some junior staff members looked on the verge of tears. I had championed their promotions and development. My executive assistant Grace stood protectively near my office door, clearly distressed. "This is outrageous," she hissed. "Everyone knows this isn't right." "It's okay, Grace," I assured her, though nothing was remotely okay. "Please email me your contact information to my personal account." Thomas pretended not to hear this exchange as I gathered photos, awards, and personal items into a cardboard box. My eyes fell on the framed photo of Richard and me at our company launch party 5 years earlier, champagne glasses raised in celebration. I left it on the desk. The final indignity was the escort to the parking garage box, in arms like a terminated employee in a corporate drama. As the elevator doors closed, cutting me off from the company I had built, I permitted myself one moment of raw emotion, a single tear that I quickly wiped away. Driving home, my humiliation transformed into something colder and more focused. Richard had orchestrated my public execution without realizing he'd given me exactly what I needed, the material breach of fiduciary duty that would trigger the clause he'd dismissed as standard legal jargon years ago. He thought he'd suspended me from our company. By morning, I would show him whose company it really was. The 20-minute drive home passed in a blur. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to breathe steadily to prevent the threatening breakdown. Not yet. I couldn't afford to fall apart yet. I parked in our driveway and sat motionless, staring at the colonial home we'd purchased after Meridian's first major contract. Every corner held memories of shared dreams and celebrations. The home office where we'd worked side by side developing business plans. The kitchen where we'd popped champagne after closing our Series A funding. The garden where Richard had surprised me with an anniversary dinner serving dishes he'd secretly learned to cook. All of it now felt like an elaborate set for a play that had concluded. Inside, I dropped my box of office belongings on the foyer table and kicked off my heels, moving on autopilot to the kitchen. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from concerned colleagues and friends who had witnessed or heard about the suspension. I silenced it without reading them. There would be time for explanations later. The emotional dam finally broke as I slumped against the refrigerator, sliding to the floor as sobs tore through my chest. The public humiliation replayed in my mind. 200 faces staring security escort, the triumphant gleam in Richard's eyes. 5 years of building something from nothing, pouring every ounce of my expertise and capital into our company, only to be discarded like a problematic employee. I allowed myself exactly 15 minutes of breakdown, timed on the microwave clock. Then I splashed cold water on my face, changed into comfortable clothes, and switched into strategic mode. First, I needed to understand exactly what Richard was planning. The suspension was clearly preemptive, designed to keep me from blocking whatever financial maneuvers he was orchestrating. But what was the end game? I went to my home office and unlocked the fireproof safe hidden in the closet. Inside were backup copies of essential documents I'd maintained since our company's founding, articles of incorporation, shareholder agreements, original business plans, and board meeting minutes, a CFO's insurance policy. The shareholder agreement contained the clause I remembered, Section 7.3 on material breach of fiduciary duty. It stated that if either founding partner engaged in financial impropriety or acted against company interests with documented evidence, their shares would be automatically reallocated to the other founding partner pending board review. Richard held 60% of shares as CEO, and I held 25% as CFO, with the remaining 15% distributed among early investors and key employees. If the clause was triggered, I would control 85% of the company until the board determined permanent distribution, but I needed concrete evidence beyond suspicion. The financial discrepancies I'd discovered were concerning but potentially explainable. I needed indisputable proof of deliberate malfeasance. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "It's Jamie, using my personal phone. Need to talk. It's important." Jamie Collins was our lead developer with the company since the early days. A quiet, brilliant programmer who avoided office politics but saw everything. I called immediately. "Vivian, what they did was wrong," Jamie began without greeting. "Richard's been acting strange for weeks, demanding access to server logs and customer data he never cared about before. Yesterday, he asked me to transfer our entire code base to a new repository only he and Jeffrey could access." "Did you do it?" I asked, holding my breath. "I created a duplicate and told him it was done. Something felt off." Jamie hesitated. "There's more." I overheard him and Jeffrey discussing a meeting with Apex Technologies yesterday. They're planning to sell our security patents separately from the company. This was significant. Our intellectual property constituted the majority of Meridian's value. Selling the patents while retaining the company shell would be like selling a house's foundation while keeping the empty frame. "Can you document any of this?" I asked. "Already did. Screen recordings of the repository requests and server logs showing unusual data transfers to external locations. I'll send everything to your personal email." After thanking Jamie, I received another unexpected message, this one from Diane Peterson, Richard's executive assistant. "Check the bottom drawer of his home office desk. He left the key in his gym bag. I'm sorry this is happening." Diane's loyalty had always been to Richard, so her message surprised me. I found the key exactly where she described and opened the locked drawer in his home office desk. Inside was a folder labelled Dissolution Strategy, containing draft divorce papers prepared by an attorney I didn't recognise, dated 3 weeks earlier. Alongside them were documents outlining a company restructuring that would dilute my ownership to less than 5% through a series of shell corporations. Most damning was a signed letter of intent from Apex Technologies, offering $50 million for our patent portfolio, addressed personally to Richard rather than to Meridian Technologies. The deal structure would channel most proceeds through offshore accounts, bypassing normal corporate distribution. Richard had been planning to divorce me, strip me of company ownership, and sell our most valuable assets for his personal gain, all while using the suspension to keep me from accessing the very financial systems that would reveal his scheme. I photographed every document, then returned them exactly as I'd found them. Next, I called my personal attorney, Eleanor Winters, who had reviewed our original incorporation documents years ago. "Ellie, I need your help with an emergency situation," I began, then outlined everything that had transpired. "The clause is solid," she confirmed after reviewing the documents I emailed, "but board support is critical. Richard will fight this. Then I'll need to move quickly before he realizes his mistake." I felt a strange calm settling over me, the same clarity that had helped me save failing companies throughout my consulting career. Working through the night, I prepared a comprehensive presentation, documenting Richard's breaches, unauthorized financial transactions, secret negotiations with competitors, misappropriation of company resources, and attempts to transfer intellectual property. I organized evidence chronologically, building an irrefutable case. Around 2 a.m., I received Jamie's promised documentation, server logs showing massive data transfers to external servers registered to shell companies connected to Apex. The logs showed Richard's credentials used for authorization, with timestamps corresponding to late nights he claimed to be working at the office. By dawn, I had contacted 3 key board members, known for their integrity, sharing enough evidence to secure their support for an emergency meeting at 7 a.m. I'd also reached out to 2 institutional investors whose stock would be devastated by Richard's patent sale. As sunrise painted our bedroom, where Richard had not returned all night, I showered and dressed with meticulous care, choosing a sharp navy suit that projected confidence and authority. The woman in the mirror looked different from the shocked, escorted executive of the previous day. She looked ready for battle. Before leaving, I took one last look at our home, the shrine to a partnership that had been illusion rather than reality. Whatever happened next, I would never return to this house or the marriage it represented. The morning light felt symbolic as I drove toward the company headquarters, where 12 hours earlier I had been humiliatingly removed. This time, I entered through the executive garage, using the spare access card I'd kept in my glove compartment. The security guard did a double take. "Ms. Evans, I thought, it's a board matter, Carl. I've been authorized to attend an emergency meeting." Not technically a lie, I had indeed been authorized by board members representing 20% of shares, enough to call such a meeting under our bylaws. I arrived 30 minutes early to secure the executive conference room, arranging copies of key evidence at each seat. As board members and investors arrived, their expressions ranged from confusion to grim understanding as they reviewed the documents. At exactly 7 a.m., Richard strode into the room, stopping abruptly at the sight of me at the head of the table. His confident smile faltered momentarily before reasserting itself. "This is highly inappropriate," he began, looking to his allies on the board. "Vivian is currently suspended pending investigation." "Actually, Richard," I replied calmly, "this meeting was properly called under Article 4 of our bylaws by board members representing over 20% of shares. You're welcome to stay, or you can recuse yourself if there's a conflict of interest." The subtle emphasis on conflict of interest wasn't lost on anyone who had reviewed the evidence before them. Richard stared at me, momentarily speechless, then quickly recovered his composure and glanced at the documentation spread across the table. His face betrayed nothing, but I noticed his hand slightly tremble as he pulled out a chair. "I'm curious what fairy tale Vivian has concocted that warranted dragging everyone in at dawn," he said with a forced chuckle, attempting to establish dominance through dismissiveness. Lawrence Bennett, our longest-serving board member and retired federal judge, spoke first. "Richard, these allegations are extremely serious. Perhaps you should review the materials before speaking." Richard flipped through the nearest folder with exaggerated nonchalance, but his jaw tightened as he recognized the Apex Technologies letter, his personal copy that should have been secured in his home office. I began my presentation methodically, emotions set aside in favor of precise financial and legal analysis. Yesterday, I was publicly suspended under allegations of financial irregularities. Today, I'm presenting evidence that this suspension was a deliberate attempt to prevent me from discovering and addressing actual financial misconduct. For the next 20 minutes, I detailed each breach chronologically: the unauthorized offshore accounts receiving regular transfers, the strategic vision partners arrangement, funneling company funds to Richard's college friend, the secret negotiations with Apex Technologies, the attempt to transfer intellectual property outside normal channels, the documented plan to restructure ownership through shell companies. With each revelation, Richard's expression hardened. His attempted interjections were firmly shut down by Lawrence, who insisted on hearing the complete presentation before responses. When I finished, the room fell silent. Richard looked around at the board members, seeming to calculate who remained in his corner. Finding fewer allies than expected, his strategy shifted. "This is clearly a personal matter spilling over into business," he said smoothly. "Vivian and I have been having marital difficulties, and I'm afraid she's construed routine business operations as something nefarious. Routine business includes hiding divorce papers while planning to strip your co-founder of her ownership," I asked, sliding copies of the dissolution strategy across the table. "Or perhaps routine business is secretly selling company patents through personal channels." Richard's face flushed. "These documents are private property taken from my home office. This is theft." "Actually," interjected Eleanor Winters, who had joined as my counsel, "these are copies of documents found in a shared home office in a jointly owned residence. The originals remain exactly where they were found." Richard changed tactics again, leaning forward with practiced sincerity. "Look, I understand how this appears, but everything I've done has been to maximize shareholder value. Apex's interest in our patents represents an extraordinary opportunity that could return tenfold on investment." Patricia Vasquez, representing our largest institutional investor, spoke for the first time. "Then why wasn't this opportunity presented to the board, Richard? Why the separate LLC structures and offshore accounts?" Richard hesitated just long enough to confirm guilt before launching into a technical explanation about tax efficiency and competitive negotiations. As he spoke, I quietly distributed the final document, the shareholder agreement with Section 7.3 highlighted. Lawrence read it carefully, then looked up with raised eyebrows. "This clause is unambiguous. Material breach of fiduciary duty triggers automatic share reallocation pending board review." "That clause was never meant to be invoked," Richard protested. "It was standard protection during company formation." "Yet it was signed and executed as part of our binding shareholder agreement," I noted, "and the evidence establishes multiple material breaches." Eleanor Winters elaborated on the legal implications while I watched Richard. The realization slowly dawned on his face. He had been so focused on removing me from the company that he'd forgotten the protective clause I'd insisted upon when investing my inheritance. "This is absurd," he finally sputtered. "You can't seriously be considering this nuclear option over what amounts to exploratory business discussions." Patricia Vasquez tapped her pen against the table. "Exploratory discussions don't typically involve transferring company assets to personal offshore accounts, Richard. The board excused us to deliberate privately." Richard and I waited in separate conference rooms, the glass walls allowing us to see but not hear each other across the hallway. He paced aggressively, making angry phone calls while I sat still reviewing mental contingencies for every possible outcome. After 45 excruciating minutes, we were called back in. Lawrence Bennett delivered the verdict. "Based on the evidence presented, the board finds sufficient cause to believe that material breaches of fiduciary duty have occurred. In accordance with Section 7.3 of the shareholder agreement, we are implementing the share reallocation provision pending a complete investigation." Richard leapt to his feet. "You can't do this. I founded this company." "Actually, we co-founded it," I corrected quietly, "and now I'm going to save it." "This is temporary," Richard insisted, looking desperately around the room. "Once a full investigation occurs." "A forensic accounting team has already been authorized," Lawrence interrupted. "They'll have complete access to all financial records and communications." Richard's face drained of colour as he realised the implications. A forensic investigation would uncover everything, not just what I had already discovered. "Effective immediately," Lawrence continued. "Vivian Evans is reinstated as CFO with expanded executive authority during this transition. Richard Evans is suspended from all operational roles pending investigation outcomes." What followed was unlike anything I could have imagined the day before. Security was called, the same security that had escorted me out, but this time they stood respectfully waiting for Richard. "You've made a catastrophic mistake," Richard hissed at me as he gathered his belongings. "This isn't over." "Actually it is," I replied softly. "Check your phone. The forensic team has already frozen the offshore accounts and contacted Apex Technologies about the unauthorized patent negotiations. There's nowhere for this to go except toward complete transparency. Richard's expression transformed from anger to something I'd never seen before. Fear. Without another word, he stormed out, followed discreetly by security personnel. Within an hour, I addressed the executive team, then called an all-hands meeting, standing in the exact spot where Richard had suspended me 24 hours earlier. The shocked faces of employees who had witnessed yesterday's drama now showed confusion, relief, and cautious optimism as I explained the leadership transition. Meridian Technologies was built on innovation and integrity, I told them. Recent events have tested one of those values, but together we will restore both. I promise complete transparency as we move forward. By noon, Richard's access to all company systems had been revoked. By 3 preliminary findings from the forensic team had uncovered additional financial improprieties dating back months. By 5, I had spoken personally with our top 10 clients to assure them of stability during the transition. As evening fell, I sat alone in what had been Richard's office, now temporarily mine, looking out at the city lights coming on against the darkening sky. On my desk sat the shareholder agreement with its crucial clause, 11 lines of legal text that had saved everything I'd worked for. Richard had suspended me in front of the whole company, believing it would break me. Instead, it had triggered the very protection mechanism I'd created for exactly this scenario. By morning, I didn't just have my job back. I owned his company. The first weeks after taking control of Meridian Technologies were a whirlwind of activity. The immediate challenge wasn't just repairing the damage Richard had done, but stabilizing a company in shock from its sudden leadership change. The morning after the board decision, I called an all-hands meeting in the same conference hall where I'd been humiliated. Standing at the podium, I could feel the uncertainty in the room. Employees wondering if they should update their resumes or wait out the storm. I know many of you witnessed something unprecedented yesterday, followed by an equally unexpected reversal today. I began deliberately keeping my tone measured. You deserve transparency about what happened and clarity about our path forward. I explained the situation without vilifying Richard. Not to protect him, but to demonstrate professional integrity. Financial irregularities were discovered that compromised our company's stability. The board has temporarily restructured leadership while a thorough investigation takes place. My commitment to you is uninterrupted operations, complete transparency, and protection of the company we've all built together. And questions ranged from practical concerns about project continuity to worried inquiries about potential layoffs. I addressed each directly, neither sugarcoating challenges nor catastrophizing them. When asked about Richard's return, I was truthful. The investigation will determine next steps based on findings. For now, we focus on what we can control, serving our clients and maintaining our market position. The media caught wind of the dramatic boardroom coup by afternoon. Technology blogs speculated wildly about the marriage and business partnership implosion at Meridian. Rather than hiding, I approved a simple statement acknowledging the leadership change and investigation without details, then instructed our PR team to decline further comment. Clients required more personal attention. I spent the entire second day making calls to our top 20 accounts, some of whom had already received concerning outreach from Richard. Marcus, I wanted to speak with you directly, I told the CIO of our largest banking client. You may have heard about leadership changes at Meridian. I want to assure you that your implementation schedule remains unchanged and your dedicated team is intact. Most clients appreciated the proactive communication. A few expressed concern about stability, which I addressed by connecting them directly with our project leads and scheduling weekly updates during the transition. The most challenging conversation was with Apex Technologies, whose executives were understandably confused about conflicting messages from Meridian leadership. Their CEO, Elena Vasquez, was refreshingly blunt. Vivian, I've received 3 calls from Richard claiming he still represents Meridian, despite what I might hear. Then, your general counsel contacted us, warning against any negotiations. What exactly is happening, and why should I continue considering Meridian a stable partner? I invited Elena to our headquarters for a confidential briefing with our legal team present. The transparency earned her trust, and she provided copies of all communication, with Richard strengthening our legal position. Throughout these external challenges, I was simultaneously navigating personal turmoil. Richard had not returned to our home, instead sending a lawyer to collect essential items. Divorce papers, legitimate ones filed through proper channels, arrived by courier on day 3. I signed them immediately, choosing the quickest path to severing our personal entanglement so I could focus on the company. Nights were the hardest. After 16-hour days of projecting confidence and calm, I would return to a hotel suite I couldn't bear our house and finally process the betrayal that underlay everything. There were tears, anger, and moments of devastating self-doubt. Had I missed signs earlier? Could I have prevented this had our entire relationship been strategic manipulation from the beginning? My one concession to self-care was a weekly session with Dr. Lillian Park, a psychologist specializing in executive stress and personal trauma. "You're managing the business crisis admirably," she observed in our second session, "but the personal betrayal requires its own processing path." With her guidance, I established clear boundaries between addressing the business aftermath and the personal aftermath, different times, different support systems, different metrics for healing. By week 3, the forensic accountants had completed their preliminary investigation, revealing a pattern of financial misconduct more extensive than I'd initially discovered. Richard had been systematically diverting company resources through elaborate structures for nearly a year, coinciding with our largest growth period. The board meeting to review these findings was somber. Lawrence Bennett summed up the collective sentiment. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or aggressive business strategy. This was a calculated betrayal of fiduciary duty and shareholder trust. The vote to make my temporary control permanent was unanimous. Richard's attorney attempted to negotiate a generous exit package, which the board firmly rejected given the evidence of misconduct. Instead, we offered a simple choice: face potential criminal charges for financial fraud, or accept termination with basic severance in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and non-compete clause. Richard chose the latter, though not without a final threatening letter delivered to my office. "You've destroyed everything we built together. Someday, when you least expect it, I'll return the favor." Security protocols were enhanced after that message, but I refused to let fear dictate my leadership. Instead, I focused on rebuilding Meridian's culture from the inside out. My first structural change was implementing financial transparency measures that would have prevented Richard's actions. Dual approval requirements for large transactions, quarterly third-party audits, and an anonymous ethics reporting system allowed employees to flag concerns without fear of retaliation. The executive team needed reshaping. Jeffrey Barnes, Richard's appointed COO, who had been complicit in the financial scheme, was immediately terminated. Other executives who had enabled Richard's behavior were offered the opportunity to rebuild trust through demonstrated commitment to new ethical standards. Some rose to the challenge, others chose to leave. I promoted Jamie Collins, the developer, who had provided critical evidence, to Chief Technology Officer, recognizing both moral courage and technical brilliance. Grace, my executive assistant, became Director of Staff Development, formalizing the mentoring role she had unofficially held for years. 3 months after taking control, I introduced an employee ownership program that distributed 10% of company shares among staff based on tenure and contribution. Meridian's success should benefit everyone who builds it, I explained at the announcement. This isn't just about financial participation, but about aligning our collective investment in Meridian's future. The program transformed company culture almost overnight. Employees who had been demoralized by recent turmoil became reinvigorated stakeholders. Productivity increased, turnover dropped, and innovation flourished as people brought forward ideas they'd previously kept to themselves under Richard's leadership. Our business strategy shifted as well. Richard had pushed for aggressive growth through acquisition, often at the expense of sustainable infrastructure. I realigned our focus on our core strengths, cybersecurity and data protection, while developing a more measured expansion into emerging markets. The personal healing took longer than the professional reorganization. I finally sold our house, donating most of the furniture to a women's shelter and keeping only items with personal significance untainted by memories of Richard. I purchased a downtown loft, walking distance from the office, a space that was completely my own, reflecting my aesthetic rather than a compromised blend. Dating felt impossible for the first year, my trust so thoroughly shattered that the thought of vulnerability with someone new seemed inconceivable. Instead, I invested in friendships, reconnecting with women I'd neglected during my all-consuming focus on Meridian and Richard. These relationships provided essential support without the complications of romance. Gradually, the raw pain of betrayal dulled into something more manageable, a scar rather than an open wound. I no longer startled at Richard's name or felt sick when passing places associated with our relationship. The divorce finalized without drama, both of us attending through lawyers rather than in person. 1 year after the boardroom confrontation, Meridian Technologies reported record profits under my leadership. Our ethical business practices earned industry recognition, and our employee retention rate became a case study at business schools. The company culture had transformed from Richard's hierarchical structure to a collaborative environment that still maintained clear accountability. I kept the plaque from the Women in Technology Leadership Award in my office, not out of vanity, but as a reminder of how completely circumstances can reverse. The inscription, "For innovative leadership during transformative challenges," captured the professional journey without hinting at the personal crucible that had forged it. When asked about Richard in industry interviews, I developed a standard response that was both truthful and professional. Meridian was co-founded with a vision of transforming cybersecurity. While leadership has evolved, our commitment to that vision remains constant. No vindictiveness, no revelation of the betrayal, just forward focus. Richard eventually launched a competing startup with considerably less success. Without access to Meridian's intellectual property or my financial discipline, his venture struggled to gain traction. I monitored its progress dispassionately, not out of lingering attachment, but prudent competitive awareness. On the anniversary of taking control of Meridian, I invited the key allies who had stood by me for a private dinner. Lawrence from the board, Jamie, who had provided crucial evidence, Grace, who had maintained unwavering support, and Eleanor, whose legal counsel had been invaluable. We didn't toast to victory or Richard's downfall, but to integrity and resilience. A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything, I told them as we shared dessert. What I didn't realize was that by trying to take everything from me, Richard actually gave me the opportunity to discover my own strength. Lawrence raised his glass. To the unexpected gift of betrayal. It shows us who we truly are. That night in my loft, looking out at the city lights, I reflected on the impossible journey from humiliated, escorted executive to company owner and respected CEO. The path had been brutal, but the destination held a peace I couldn't have imagined during those dark initial days. The woman who had driven home in tears after being suspended was unrecognizable to me now. In her place stood someone who had faced complete betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and finally free from seeking validation from someone incapable of giving it. My father once told me, "The measure of success isn't never falling, it's how you rise after being knocked down." If that's true, then Richard's attempt to destroy me had inadvertently led to my greatest success of all, not the company ownership or professional recognition, but the unshakable self-trust that comes only from rebuilding from ashes. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately made you stronger? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey from public humiliation to empowerment, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more real stories of overcoming workplace adversity. Remember, sometimes what looks like your worst day can become the first day of your best chapter. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to face your own challenges with the same resilience we all possess deep within.